Doug and Helen Free. Where to begin when it comes to Doug and Helen Free? Please indulge me. But I'd like to begin way back at the impressionable age of 14. In 1971, I'm waiting for a gasp of disbelief. In 1971, I was a freshman here at Gonzaga. Back then, the cafeteria was small, and we didn't have the lower commons. At the east end of the cafeteria, there was a stairwell which led up to the first floor corridor of the main building, what we now call Building Hall. The senior tables in the cafeteria was right near that stairwell. And one day, as I was walking up the steps, I tripped and spilled my books all over the stairs. And some of the seniors, if you could imagine, started harassing me. And of course, I was embarrassed. At that moment, a popular senior football player named Doug Free happened to be on his way down those same steps. He bent down and helped me pick up my books and said, quote, "Don't pay any attention to those clowns." My thought was, oh my God, he's actually talking to me. And needless to say, from that day forward, I knew I liked this guy. Fast forward 2 decades, when I arrived back on I Street to work in campus ministry and to teach. And who did I have the good fortune to befriend as my new colleague? My old ally, Doug Free, who had returned to Gonzaga in 1980 and earned a reputation as one of the school's best and most widely respected English teachers. In addition, I got to know Helen Free, a formidable and beloved English teacher with whom I became fast friends. What a joy it was to be back at Gonzaga with those two as part of my community of colleagues. What a joy it's been in all the years since. Doug, Helen, and I had the pleasure of working under the leadership of longtime Gonzaga headmaster Joe Tangerini. When asked what made Doug and Helen such valued members of the faculty, Joe explained that they worked hard at understanding the material they presented to their students, and they made it a point to earn their students' respect. As you may remember from your own school days, it only takes a few minutes on that first day for a student to assess, who is this person standing in front of me who has my life in his or her hands? Although their teaching styles were different, Doug and Helen were both demanding and deeply invested in the development of their students. Longtime former English teacher Rick Cannon describes Doug's teaching style as professional to a T. He says he was thoughtful, organized, and always prepared. Dave Dooman, now Gonzaga's Director of Advancement, in case you didn't know. Dave had as a freshman year English teacher. He remembers his fastidious attention to detail and the command he had of the classroom, standing tall, often in a dapper sweater, modeling a classical approach marked by classroom dialogue and regular pop quizzes. Quote, "He was one of the hardest but always the very best teacher I had," says Dave. Indeed, since my return to Gonzaga as president 5 years ago, I've had many conversations with so many alumni about their favorite teachers. And the Frees, both Doug and Helen, are regularly remembered as the best teachers our alumni had at Gonzaga. I think that's primarily because you remember the ones who care about you, which Doug and Helen both did deeply, and also care enough about you to tell you when you were messing up. Both Doug and Helen have the talent for helping students straighten up their acts. Doug would say, quote, "Look, I'm talking to you as a man who's been right where you are, who's been through it. Now, straighten up," close quote. Helen had a way of making them reflect on their actions. She would say, "Seriously? You want to do that? That's your decision?" It was really important, especially in a boys' school, for students to have a strong authority figure like Helen, who could get them to pay attention to their behavior, not through reprimanding, but by making them realize how a decent person should behave. Helen had great influence not only on her students, but on her fellow faculty and staff members, particularly the women. She lifted them up like no one else could. She took the time to know them and to talk with them, and in the process, she inspired them. She was endlessly selfless with her with her advice, expertise, and support. Her guidance was never aimed at making replicas of herself, but instead inspiring others to be the best versions of themselves. Gonzaga's director of student activities and science teacher, Caitlin Farley, was one of many young teachers whom Helen took under her wing. At a retiree luncheon honoring Helen a few years back, Caitlin spoke fondly of her mentor, saying, quote, "Helen's mastery of the craft of teaching is the stuff of legends. When students try to explain to me why Helen is such a fantastic teacher, there is always a momentary pause, a quick cringe. I've learned to recognize that cringe as a memory of how naive and confident they were in their writing before submitting their first paper to Helen. After the pause, every student says some version of, quote, I thought I was a decent writer, but she ripped me to shreds. If their paper was boring or unimagined, Helen told them. If they were simply regurgitating facts, she told them. If when their vocabulary lacked inspiration, she told them. Frequently, she would condemn an assignment entirely by simply stating and writing, quote, I stopped reading this here. I stopped reading this here because this is crap. Helen's brutal honesty taught students to have an open mind when facing harsh criticism. But what made her so beloved was that she took the care to build our young men back up. Her compliments were as fierce as her criticism. And when her students succeeded, her praise was specific and genuine. The students worked desperately for her approval, which taught them to take a new level of pride in their writing. And that kind of pride sticks for a lifetime. Helen spent her entire professional career as a teacher, 38 of those years here at Gonzaga. She was honored with the prestigious Hurley Award at Charter Day in 2006, which is determined by a vote of the faculty and recognizes those who embody excellence as a Jesuit educator. After 20 years of teaching on I Street, Doug went on to law school and served admirably as an attorney at the National Labor Relations Board. An award presented each year at graduation to the student who most excels in English is named in honor of Doug. I would be remiss if I neglected to mention that Doug and Helen are always a lot of fun to be with. They have great senses of humor. Both are joyful, playful, trustworthy, and kind. They hosted lively dinners and faculty parties at their home on Capitol Hill. Their longtime friend and fellow Gonzaga staff member Scott Blair speaks fondly of the friendly mischief that goes hand in hand with the trees, as he emphasized that they both know what it means to be true, loyal friends. Students like them, both of them, a great deal. But back in the 1980s, a student even wrote a tremendous ode to Doug. Quote, "I was in prison, then I was Doug free." In all seriousness, Doug and Helen, I am so happy that you are here tonight to receive this small token of our appreciation for nearly 60 combined years of service and devotion to Gonzaga. I am delighted that your beloved sons and daughter and alumni, both alumni, sons are alumni, Tim and Gabe, have come here to I Street to witness this celebration. Thank you all for coming. Doug and Helen, you have lived the lives that Ignatian educators are called to live because you gave of yourselves wholeheartedly and always put the good of your students and colleagues before your own. Doug and Helen, it is my honor to share with you and bestow upon you the St. Aloysius Medal with our deep gratitude and profound admiration.